Cardboard Herald podcast. I am Eric, joined as always by my lovely co-host Jack. How are you doing today, Jack?
I am full of burritos and ready to talk about board games.
I thought it was fajitas.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm using burrito as like the overall genre and fajita as a subtype. You know, like Listen, I didn't even have any tortillas here, so they can't rightly be fajitas or burritos. But I made all the fixins and had it on a plate and then ate it very fast. It was very fancy, it was very delicious, and it is all the fuel that I need to talk about board games.
Great. Amazing. I'm glad that you are beamed up on a Saturday evening.
I'm beamed up in multiple ways, more ways than one. I got my coffee right here. What'd you have for dinner?
I had black bean soup that I made a couple days ago that I reheated.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it was just nice, super easygoing black bean soup. I accidentally bought, well, not accidentally. This part I did on purpose. I was at the store and the manager messed up and put a 4-pound bag of dried beans on sale for like $1.25. Mm-hmm. But then I was just like, oh, well, I'll just make all of them now and I'll use them in various ways. And I should just not have made 4 pounds of black beans.
Yeah.
At once. I should have spread that out more. So then I also have like some burritos that are in the freezer that I will reheat as needed. But
what do you do for a flavor in your soup? Because you're vegetarian. When I think of black bean soup, I think of like adding something smoky, like a chorizo or a bacon or something. But you know, like there's all kinds of alternatives that you can do, or just different flavor profiles. So is it kind of more like a lentilish type of thing?
No, I definitely do. I mean, it fully depends. I might do like a dried pepper from just from that aisle of the grocery store, or because that'll give you a lot of smokiness as is. But also, I use a ton of seasonings. I mean, I cook pretty regularly, so I use fresh spices that I either toast myself, like I toast and grind my own cumin seeds most of the time. Now we're in the culinary Herald podcast.
Hey, we could be playing Kitchen Rush right now. You know, like we could have. I mean, we could realistically be going for like some sort of imprint. You know, if we try to tie the culinary thing and the board game world close enough, we could try going for like this is the Cardboard Herald edition.
That's true. We could. Yeah, maybe we go try and like get an expansion on Kitchen Rush. Or
Cardboard Mirepoix.
Cardboard Mirepoix. Oh,
yeah, there you
nice.
go. There you go. All right. What do we do on this podcast?
I don't know. We talk about black beans. We talk about beans. And we also talk about board games. I finally was able to attend a board game night here in DC. I had a lovely time playing Camel Up, which is a rad game. I had not played before.
That's your first time playing Camel Up? Yeah, I love that game.
That game's awesome.
Yes. So I have the original edition. Does the current... I know that the current edition has like some visual differences, but does it still have the like pyramid structure that is kind of like a toyish type thing that you drop dice from in the middle?
Yep. It has that. Right. It has the camels that stack on top of each other. It has a random palm tree that like folds up with the board for no reason, and I love it so much for that. It has all of those. That was we were playing the second edition, and I knew that game was awesome. Like I know enough about it to know that it's a fun game before I played.
Right.
But then, that was
so
great.
I have a hack for you for Camel Up, something that I recommend to anyone who likes that game, and everyone who's done this has at least reported that they have continued to do it in perpetuity. That is, name all your camels really fun names, like Camdoff the White, or, you know, the Great Green Blur, or, you know, something like that. One, it encourages everyone to get in character, you know, shouting over their camels like they're actually at a horse race or camel race or whatever. But what we ended up doing was we started recording on sticky notes the names of all our camels and putting that on the inside of the box. And that has been such a great legacy since owning Camel Up, to see like the heritage of these different camels. And we have like almost camel breeding programs. Like, we know that these are like the sires and foremothers of various different camels. It's a whole thing. So naming your camels, I think, will increase immersion in Camel Up at least by 15%.
I also love that you turned Camel Up into a legacy game. That's fun.
Yeah.
That's rad.
Yeah. Rob Davio, you know, hit me up.
But I got Camel Up played. I also I'm trying to go much I'm back on the kick of Spirit Island, so I've been going through the app on that. The app's good. I floated an idea to you like a while ago, which was to do board game apps and like rank them, which I have a ton of notes on, but I'll put into a video at some point or another. But the Spirit Island app, I really did not like on my phone the first few times I tried it, like years ago. But I've tried it again recently, and it works pretty well. I don't know if there was like an update or if I'm just coming back to it with fresh eyes, but my phone is good. I also inherited, sounds like my sister died. My sister gave me an iPad. My sister is still fully alive, just to be clear. Well, you know,
I
where
mean,
are we in this world?
as far as you know, she could be a specter, a ghoul.
That's true. She could be a ghost. Could be fun.
A Type 3 spectral entity.
But yeah, Spirit Island on the iPad. Also, really solid.
Yeah.
So
I've enjoyed it. I checked it out when it first came out, and then I've also played the Tabletop Arena version, and that one is very well implemented, but also really expansive, and it's a really big game. So like, it kind of assumes that you are someone who really jives with Tabletop Arena. And if you do, then I think it is everything that you could ever want or imagine. Or not Board Game Arena, or not Tabletop Arena. Why am I forgetting it? The
Tabletop
Steam
Simulator.
Tabletop Simulator. There you go.
Yeah.
I was, portmanteauing Board Game Arena and Tabletop Simulator. But the TTS mod is really expansive, but it's TTS. I like the app a lot. Have you played any new spirits that you haven't gotten to the table yet?
No, I'm still just playing on the base game, so I haven't even... I still need to... I was trying that out to see if I wanted to unlock the rest of the game, because it costs however much money. It costs about
night,
as much as the board game itself.
Yeah. Yes. I think I've heard that. That's crazy. That shouldn't be a thing. So last night, Christina and I ended up playing Spirit Island as well.
I thought I saw that in the background. Is that...
Yeah. Well, it's
I don't know. I don't know why I'm leaning.
It's somewhere
over
over there.
Change.
It's we played 2 of the Horizons of Spirit Island spirits, but playing with the full invaders. I don't know, Brandenburg, Prussia, or whatever.
Yeah.
A couple notches of difficulty up, and I thought because we were playing the more approachable, simpler spirits that we would have a harder time, and oh my god, we wrecked face. Like, I was I never remember the names, the Mud Sneck, who's, squiggly neck, yellow snack dude.
I think it's an otter. It looks like an otter to me. You said
No, not the otter guy. He kind of looks like a dinosaur, and he's got like mud coming out and everything. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and then she played the like trees with eyes in them, and she just like defended a bunch, and then I like took my neck and just smacked down on all the invaders, and we rolled them. It was kind of crazy. We got a simultaneous full fear victory the same moment in which we destroyed the last city. So we got like double victories at the same time. It was crazy.
I'm not a chiropractor, but I do think that I would have to recommend against using your neck as a weapon.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, evolution is a crazy thing, and
Giraffes do
spirit evolution is probably doubly so. Did Darwin study it, like when he was at the Galapagos? Do you think he studied spirit evolution?
He probably should have.
I'm an idiot. I shouldn't go on this tangent. I've already brought us on enough tangents here. Okay, board games. Got to bring it back. See, this is what happens when I'm full of beans. So
blame it on the beans.
Terraforming Mars, the dice game. I played that. I sent you a meme about it. Mm-hmm. Have you played it?
I have not.
Okay, so I played this at PlatypusCon, and it's and then I also played it afterwards. I ended up with a copy of it through events. So I played it twice. It just isn't that great. Like, I want it to be great. I want the dice to be great. I want a lot of fun and exhilarating cool stuff to come out of dice. But Terraforming Mars at its heart and what it preserves throughout the original game, Ares Expedition, and this is this sense of cultivating this like monstrous engine where you are just popping off so many cards, all these projects that are coming together. And by having your resources all be dice, it feels like you're constantly working against the resource system in the game, which is the opposite of what you want out of an engine building game, which it still is. It preserves that core element. It just is at odds with itself. Takes a little bit longer than it should, is not as poppy as you really want out of a dice game. It's not as precise as you want out of a Terraforming Mars game. It's not terrible. It kind of pales in comparison to the original, and in particular, my favorite, and I think your favorite as well, Ares Expedition.
Yeah.
Other than that, I mean, I played a ton of stuff at PlatypusCon. That could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But the one thing that I wanted to mention is I got to play the new Mistborn game.
Oh, rad.
Yeah. That is a really interesting game because it doesn't do that much that's novel from a deck building game perspective. And John D. Clare was the guest of honor at PlatypusCon, which was really cool to have him up. Played a bunch of games with him. I played Mistborn with him. And he even admitted that, he typically goes for something a little bit more mechanically innovative than this, but because of the licensed property, he was trying to go for a specific thing. And most of the game structure feels like it could have come out 10 years ago. Not to say it's bad, it just doesn't feel like completely novel. This is going to be the game that, sweeps you off your feet or anything. But it does make use out of 8 unique resources that you have, which are the different metals from the Mistborn, the common metals used in the story, and make sense out of that to make an approachable deck building game where you are navigating so many different potential resources in a way that feels fluid, that feels smart, that feels flexible, that you can still lean into a couple of those any given game and have unique outcomes. I think that is really the achievement. It adds a layer of nuance to a more or less traditional deck building system. I think it manages to evoke the setting and tone of the Cosmere, and in particular the Mistborn books, a lot more than a typical deck building game would. So, like for me, as a fan of that stuff, as a Sandersonian fanboy, I think it succeeded. I don't know that you need to rush out and buy this unless you are a super fan or you are just really into deck building games, but it was one of the more positive things to come out of the convention.
Rad. And is the deck building game just the first, like in terms of the story, just the first book? Or does it have nods to the other in the original trilogy?
I think that from what I saw, which I actually got to play some unreleased materials, a prototype of an expansion there, but it seems like the base game is predominantly focused on the setting and events of the first book without really even spoiling what happens in that first book. Those that have read it know that there's a pretty substantial change of change of how the world looks from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, and power structures and that kind of stuff. And I think it is all kind of set in a vague, this is the first half of the first book, if it's not going to spoil anything beyond that.
Cool. Fun. Well, I'm glad that you got that played. And I think that with Mistborn being, it sounds like a little bit of a celebration of many older, more structured deck builders. As good of a segue as any into our topic for this week, which is the Board Game Geek Hall of Fame. I have a couple different thoughts on this, but just
I have a couple of different thoughts on that transition, but let's.
I think that one was pretty good, all things considered. I think
that was labored. That had to be tortured into place. The Lord Ruler had to stretch that one out a little bit to get it to land. But okay. So BGG Hall of Fame. What is this thing?
So, Board Game Geek announced that they are inducting, they're creating a Hall of Fame where they're going to induct 25 games a year for the foreseeable future, I assume. At least a few more years. And they
have they actually said that it's going to be 25 per year or just 25 to start? Because this is a celebration of 25 years of BGG, right?
Yeah, I believe I saw that they're doing 25 games a year. I'm now not seeing that, but I'm pretty sure I read that at some point or another in the let me take a little gander. But I think what I'm saying is correct. Of course I do. But I think that's I'm pretty sure that's the case. Mm-hmm. But they go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to kind of follow up with that. Like, so this is their nominations for games that is separate from what is often looked at as the definitive best games of all time list, which is the BGG Top 100, which is a little bit more fluid and is user based, right? That's where people's analytics, the algorithm is going into generating who is on top. And there have been long-standing games that have been in the top 100, and it's an event when something overtakes one game or another. There have been periods of years where the top game is the top game, and they've been a little bit opaque about the analytics that go into a ranking of a game. But before, like a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, if someone were to be like, where can I find a list of the best games of all time? The easiest thing to point someone to would be to say, just look at the BGG Top 100. And this is now BGG saying, well, that's one thing, but here's this other thing.
Yeah, and I think that this is, at least from the marketing of it, seems to be more of a celebration of games that have shaped the history of board gaming in a way. So there are a lot of games on here that are nowhere near the top 100, but at least at this point. But
Right.
they maybe have like changed how board gaming is perceived by the general public, changed how board games are designed. There are a couple in here that I think really fit that mold, where it is just like this established a genre that is like
Right.
super prevalent now, such as I think Dominion is one of those, where it's like that built deck builders,
Right.
which are just
right.
such a huge part of our hobby right now. And there are a couple others that are in there that are in a similar way this established a genre or changed how we think about board games in a way.
Yeah. So I think just for us and for our listeners, I'm just going to read this mission statement. That's, if you Google BGG Hall of Fame, then you'll come to this page, and we'll have a link to this in the show notes and everything. But the mission statement is: the games in the BGG Hall of Fame are recognized for being noteworthy and historically significant to board games. Many of the games on this are great games, but beyond that, they are games which are important and influential. They are the groundbreakers and innovators, and even when newer, shinier games catch our fancy, we cannot deny that these games form the building blocks of our hobby. And here's the important like metrics here,
Yeah.
or like the plan. To be eligible for the BGG Hall of Fame, a game must be at least 10 years old. The voting process is held once a year and is open to the entire BGG community. Currently, a game... Wait a second. Am I looking at something way, way old? Am I looking at like an ancient list? This is
Maybe.
from January 2011.
What are you looking at?
What am I looking at? I was looking for the BGG Hall of Fame. We might have to go back here.
Because I was really confused. You started reading a mission statement. I'm like, that is not on the page I'm looking at. Where are you finding this?
I just Googled BGG or Board Game Geek Hall of Fame, and it was the first thing. I'm going to put this into Skype. Because a lot of these things... Wait, where do I go to chat? Okay. So now if I go to Geek Preview... Okay, now I'm on the official BGG Hall of Fame.
Okay, yeah. I think what you pulled up is just somebody who made an account called BGG Hall of Fame. That is not the official one. I think this is just some list or some guy.
Let's see. Rishi. Yeah, I guess so. Okay. It's currently maintained by Rishi. All right.
So, what I have here is and this is the official one. Don't listen to Jack and his lies. The board game
you're going to have
Hall of
a time editing this for sure.
It's okay. No, I'm leaving all of this in. This is funny. The Board Game Geek Hall of Fame honors games that have made meaningful contributions to the board game hobby in the areas of innovation, artistry, and impact. By curating this distinguished list, Board Game Geek seeks to preserve the history and evolution of board gaming while inspiring and informing a global community of players who have a passion for games. Additional games will be inducted annually as the world of board games continue to evolve. At the moment, it seems the selection process is a jury of dedicated and experienced players, is the information we have about them. Board games have to be at least 10 years old in order to ensure widespread engagement and recognition. Additionally, the jury identified and included games that, while perhaps less widely played, have had a profound and lasting impact on the hobby. The other note they have here is that it focuses on modern board games that have directly shaped the contemporary hobby and community. Games such as Check, Backgammon, Go, and traditional 52-card games fall outside the scope of these awards.
All right. Well, now we have the actual rules, and I am looking at the actual list here. Things were starting to go like, oh, users can vote on. Wait a second, I thought this was an independent panel because I was actually like following it as it came along. They need to work on
cut that out.
Google. They need to work on Google.
They got to get their SEO better. They got to improve
yes.
their SEO.
They got to improve it. We all are working on it. I mean, I get enough pings from spam mail where people are like, we can make sure that you end up at the top of the blah, 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 blah. I'm like, ain't no one doing that for Cardboard Hell.
No.
Anyway.
The games, you can look up the list yourself, but I guess we'll really quickly run through the 25 games. I don't think that it makes sense for us to do like a deep dive into every single one of these. That just is kind of not, I think, a good use of our listeners' time or our time. Right. But the games inducted this year in the order that BGG has them listed is Diplomacy, Acquire, Cosmic Encounter, Civilization, 1830 Railways and Robber Barons, Magic the Gathering, The Settlers of Catan, El Grande, Tigris and Euphrates, Raw, Carcassonne, Power Grid, Ticket to Ride, Kalis, Twilight Struggle, Through the Ages, Agricola, Brass, Race for the Galaxy, Dominion, Pandemic, Seven Wonders, The Castles of Burgundy, Terra Mystica, and Concordia. Those are the first 25 games inducted as of right now. So I think that there's, I don't, based on what I'm seeing, there's not a ton of game that I would disagree with on here. I think especially if this is meant to be like we are preserving in history the legacy of board games in a similar way like baseball's Hall of Fame or any of the other sports Hall of Fames. Like if that's what this is kind of supposed to be molded after, where it's like these are super iconic games that inspired a ton of board games or like were super influential to the hobby. I think that there's a ton here that I don't think there can be a ton of disagreements with at least this list.
Yeah, there are some omissions, I think.
Yes.
And there are some games that I think I would trade out. Or at least I do a little bit more horse trading with. Like, for example, we have 3 pretty iconic worker placement games with El Grande, Kalis, and Agricola. And I recognize that all 3 of those do slightly different. Well, I guess I misspoke there. We have 2 worker placement games with Agricola and Kalis, and area control by way of Euro with El Grande. So let's leave El Grande on there. Let's leave that on there. But Kalis and Agricola, they do different things, but I think they play in the same territory. I think one of those could have been an addition later on. And I don't necessarily have a huge dog in the fight, other than I think Agricola is the better and ultimately more recognized and community building game. But I think there's room for some lighter games that weren't recognized on here. Like, honestly, I would trade one of those for, say, King of Tokyo as a game that really built up a lot of goodwill in the hobby towards dice and Yahtzee type mechanisms. Maybe that doesn't really work very well because Richard Garfield is already on here for Magic.
I was going to say Richard Garfield's already on there. I think he's square away, and that's actually the one that I guess find the most perplexing. I don't disagree with Magic the Gathering in terms of like that is obviously like such a behemoth, but it feels really tangentially related to the modern board game hobby. Like, I know that there is quite a bit of crossover with TCG players and board gamers. Like, there's overlap there. But I just feel like Magic the Gathering is definitely, like, the biggest, most influential trading card game. But I guess it seems odd to include that in the Board Game Geek Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it seems like if you're going to include that, then you have to at least give consideration to something like Warhammer. And then if you're going to give consideration to Warhammer, do you need to give consideration to Dungeons and Dragons? Like, if we're talking about one of the most influential tabletop games, that half of the games on this list depend on some of the innovations that came out of those early years of role-playing, then D&D is definitely going to be there. And even in the description of Magic the Gathering as their blurb for the Hall of Fame here, they mention Richard Garfield took inspiration from Cosmic Encounter and Dungeons and Dragons. So, you know, like, I don't know. It does seem like if you're going to bring in something tangential like that, it opens up the space and kind of muddies the list a bit.
Yeah, and then that also goes to why is it Magic the Gathering and not Dungeons and Dragons? Like, I feel like if you're already going to go tangential, Dungeons and Dragons is at least in my opinion, the incredibly much more influential to our hobby game that isn't quite a board game geek game.
Right.
But it's, you know, I think in a vacuum, I can understand why Magic the Gathering is included on this list in terms of preserving a cultural phenomena that is a tabletop game. And it's,
I guess I could see mechanically it is very influential in that there are a lot of board games that are trying to be a box board game interpretation of Magic. Like, this is Magic, but and that could just be, this is Magic, but it's not collectible. Or this could be Magic, but you have minis to represent your, you know, wizards, but otherwise you're essentially playing Magic. Or it could be Magic, except you have this kind of commander type of guy, but now Magic has commanders.
Yeah, as I said, Magic has commanders. What are you on about?
Yeah. This is what happens when you give me too many beans. You shouldn't have fed me fajitas for dinner, Eric. Came all the way up from DC.
Beans too strong.
But okay, so Magic is a perplexing pull for you. My overzealous pull of 3, but actually 2 worker placement games. I don't know what I was thinking there. Again, the beans. But I don't know. When you picked this topic, I know I floated it as an idea, but what were some of the things that, you know, you thought would be good to discuss here?
I think the things that I thought would be good to discuss is, one, notable omissions, because I think there are a few that are there are some where I kind of get it, which we'll talk about. But I think notable omissions, and then also either predictions for future years based on this list, or also just kind of our thoughts on the concept as a whole. I feel like we kind of got our thoughts as the concept of the whole. I'm for it. I think that it's really fun for us to have like this thing of, this is another thing to aspire to in our hobby when you're designing a board game, is you want to get a game that will one day make the Hall of Fame. I think for our hobby, it also makes sense for it to be this like big thing that is annual, once a year,
right?
Capped like 10. The game has to be out for 10 years beforehand to be eligible. I think that makes sense. Just to get, like, the general impact, so that we're not getting like the Cult of New, where it's like some. I love, like, just for example, I love arcs. I don't think that should be in the Hall of Fame yet. Like that game is fresh.
Of course.
Let's let it simmer. Let's let it see how the reactions go, and then also you might be able to stop yourself from putting in a game that has a controversy attached to it later, such as, at least in my opinion, the biggest notable omission. But we'll talk about that when we get to omissions. What are your thoughts on just the concept as a whole?
Well, I mean, as a big music guy, this immediately brings to mind the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which there's a lot of people who absolutely love and pay attention to that every year, and a lot of people who just think that it's all a bunch of BS, like all award ceremonies can potentially be. And when it's a private company that is maintaining some sort of award system, then I think there's always going to be some degree of distrust in the process. And if it has ulterior motives. Fortunately, I think Board Game Geek for the whole has become and self-identified and continued to be the hub of all things board games that everything ebbs and flows out of. Even if you're not a regular user, it is so integral to the state of the hobby and has so much influence over the state of the hobby right now that I think it makes sense that Board Game Geek is doing this. I would like to have a little bit more transparency about like what the process is. I get that there's a voting jury who kind of work this out. And I understand that it's not always the best to show how the sausage is made. Like, we don't get insider intel on how like Academy Awards are determined and everything, right? But this isn't an award for new things that are coming out right now. This is trying to recognize for the community as a whole these games, and in doing that, I think either it needs to have some sort of component where the community can weigh in, or it should have more transparency on how the games are initially nominated and then ultimately selected. But as a thing, I'm for it. I mean, us board game content creators, we love lists, right?
Yeah, we love lists. This is great.
We love lists. And if you don't like this list, well, you really don't have to engage with it. Like, it doesn't inherently change anything on Board Game Geek, at least as of right now. Maybe 5 years from now, it'll have some greater impact on how things are handled. Or if this like impacts sales or, revisions of older games, that kind of thing. But for right now, it's a pretty innocuous thing.
Yeah. Oh, and there's okay. Yeah. I was going to say, I wonder if with this, you have, a like badge or something on there, because I think that would be a fun way of being like, oh yeah, this is a game. And they have a thing where it's just like awards and honors 2025 Board Game Geek Hall of Fame inductee.
Right.
So it's there, it exists. I think more transparency in the system is great. That also makes sense, where it's like, it would be good for us to know exactly how the list is put together. But I can also see it being like the Oscars, where it's, you get what you get. You find out who won, and that's about the end of the process.
Is there any game on this list that you would just straight up take off? Aside from Magic. We've already talked about Magic.
Magic Gathering would be the one.
Aside, like the worker placement thing aside, and maybe this isn't reflective of the community as a whole, but I'd drop Terra Mystica, like especially in favor of what I think we're going to say is the biggest omission, being Puerto Rico.
Yeah. We can say the name now. It's been we've now broken the seal. We can now say the name.
Yeah, but even if we're not bringing in Puerto Rico for, controversial reasons or because of, the content hasn't aged or whatever, I still think Terra Mystica is kind of an obscure pick on here. While it made a big splash at the time, to me, Terra Mystica is one of those kinds of games where it was a big deal when it came out, but it's not really that big of a deal now. Like, I don't really feel its influence as far and wide as so many of these other games on here.
Yeah, I think that Terra Mystica's fair in terms of, I think that its influence has not spread much past the big splash it made when it was released. I think I love Pandemic, and I think that it has a massive, it in itself is a pretty sizable following. I don't know if I necessarily think that it's if it should be on here in front of some of the other omissions. I think Pandemic is maybe not a year one inductee. I guess it did a ton for co-op.
Yeah, I disagree. I think that it is, if there's any game that represents the popularity of cooperative gaming, and that endless amounts of cooperative games were based off of, it'd be Pandemic. I mean, having the fortune of interviewing both Matt Leacock and Bruno Catala, who both cite the Lord of the Rings, Reinhard Knizia cooperative game as the direct inspiration for both Pandemic, and then Bruno Catala talked about it influencing Shadows over Camelot, which is a massively influential Hidden Traitor game.
Yeah.
I think the case could be made that you'd be going back to the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But that was more of a niche thing that two really smart, creative individuals jumped off and made their own things, and those are the things that kind of inspired everything to come. So I like Pandemic on here. Plus, Reinhard Knizia is going to get enough love on this list eventually. I mean, he's already got Tigris and Euphrates here, and if they keep on doing this year after year, I don't know how they're going to escape. He's also got Raw on here.
I was about to say, he also has Raw. He has 2 games on here, so he's okay. He's all good. He doesn't need any more. I think for me, I mean, I said it kind of at the start where I think that all of these games, it's difficult to disagree with any specific game on this list, but I do think that the omission of Puerto Rico is just, it's a statement. I think that that's clearly saying that because of the content of that game, which I actually am kind of fully behind it, because this is, despite the fact that I really enjoy the mechanics, I can't, I don't want to play that game with anybody. I don't want to teach it to anybody because of the content. And I think that it just, the statement that Board Game Geek is putting out there with omitting it from this, because that's the longest lasting number 1 spot in Board Game Geek, in their algorithm ranking. Puerto Rico's spot at number 1 was the longest lasting, and the fact that it's not on this list basically is their statement of, because of the very poor aging of that game's premise.
I mean, let's just acknowledge what this is. So Puerto Rico, like many games before and since, is a game of colonialization where you are playing as the profiteers and perpetrators of that colonialization, and you are exploiting the people and the land. And Puerto Rico is one of the games where it is the most transparent about that's what it is. That's what you're doing. We're not making qualms about this. Like, even the colors of the cubes are not making mistakes about what it is you're doing in this game. And that is taking real world tragedy and not contextualizing it in any way as a tragedy and putting you in direct control of the perpetrators without kind of admonishing that. Now, you could argue it's not a game's responsibility to teach morality or to give commentary or perspective or anything, but if games are more than just distractions, then I think context is important. I mean, we care a lot about historical games, right? And historical gamers for time immemorial have always wanted some sort of authenticity. And that also brings with it a degree of controversy. And when we are doing something that is a retrospective, I think it's important to give that sort of context. Now, I don't know that Puerto Rico should be removed. Like, maybe it should be an honorable mention, or maybe it should be on here with some sort of disclaimer, in the same way that I think, say, Gone with the Wind is an important film to film history, and I think that it should still be viewed as a milestone in the development of cinema. However, it should definitely be contextualized for what was overlooked at the time as being a problem and why it is a problem now, and the responsibility of the people who make these things to add that context at this point. So, yes, I think they're making a statement. And I agree with you. I don't want to play Puerto Rico. I used to love playing Archipelago. And Archipelago is a game that eventually, actually after talking to the designer, I thought there was some legitimate commentary within the game. And after talking to the designer and realizing that, no, there is no satire in this game whatsoever, I was like, oh, now I just look at this and feel disappointed in playing this game. And maybe that should have been an obvious from the beginning. But, people change, opinions change, feelings change. We can't entirely, whitewash our history and pretend these things don't exist. And so I understand from that perspective why I think it should at least be in the footnote here. However, I do think that it's important that we call out particularly notable atrocities when we're looking at things in retrospect like this.
Yeah, and I think that I would be interested if they just didn't want to include it as these are the first 25 games inducted. These are the 25 games we felt most confident should represent our hobby. I would be interested to see if it makes it on next year when it's
right.
Okay, we're doing, we are going to induct it and we're going to put a footnote at that point. Or if they were just, this is another thing they could have been doing, which is just testing out to see how people react to Puerto Rico not being on there and seeing if it should get in next year.
Honestly, I think they should have just made it a footnote on Race for the Galaxy, because Race for the Galaxy, for a lot of people, was hey, this is Puerto Rico, but in space and a little bit better. That it shares so much DNA and had so much comparison that putting Race for the Galaxy in here, I think, is that acknowledgement that we're not putting Puerto Rico. That's that statement, right?
Yeah.
But that was also their opportunity to provide that context and recognize that game, which, everyone's going to have an opinion, and everyone's going to do things a little bit different. And we on this channel, like when we're making our list of games, like we have to make decisions about what lines we draw, how much we want to get into the sausage getting made. And you don't want to necessarily let the audience drive everything as well, because that undermines the intent and integrity of the thing itself, right? If they went and added a 26th thing that was Puerto Rico, that wouldn't be great.
That would not feel good.
That would show the pressure on it. And if they added it next year, I think everyone would speculate, oh, Board Game Geek is just giving in to, adding it. I don't love how it was approached here. I don't love Puerto Rico for that matter. I'm fine with it just being a footnote. But I feel like it was a little bit rocky how they handled not including it, but I'm fine with them not including it.
Yeah. And I think that's, it's not in this year. I don't know if it didn't make it in this year. I personally am going to be surprised if it makes it in next year. And speaking of, there's quite a few games that I'm interested to see if they will make it. Because I guess, first of all, if it's 25 games a year every year, that's too many. Like, if they're doing 25 games a year, like, I guess is like a first, let's get a set standard list of 25 games that then we will add more games onto. That makes sense, but I think 25 games a year is too much.
I think the only other notable omission to me was Axis and Allies. I'm not a big Axis and Allies guy, but for the people who grew up playing Risk, like it was their go-to, I play this with my family on Thanksgiving or whatever. Axis and Allies, to me, is that step in between modern gaming and the classic war gaming that is mass market available. And so I'm just kind of flabbergasted that it's not on here.
Yeah, I think some ones I have down here as, at least kind of in my opinion and kind of reading comments about it, as notable omissions are Puerto Rico, and we've talked about that, Twilight Imperium, Viticulture, Le Havre.
I don't Le Havre necessarily belongs on here, but I get you.
It's one that I've seen a couple different times. Mage Knight, which I don't think needs to be on here, but just I have seen as like I think I'm trying to let me see what it was. There is a list that had a lot of overlap, where it was the Geek Madness tournament. I guess this isn't where I found Mage Knight. But the Geek Madness tournament is a once per year tournament where people vote on their favorite games of all time. Puerto Rico is the highest voted. Like it has the second most of those tournament wins to not be in the Hall of Fame. And then next up is War of the Ring at 17.
Yeah, War of the Ring seems like it probably should be, if not on this list, then definitely next year. Le Havre, I don't think needs to be on here. Uwe Rosenberg already has representation, and it does something different for sure than Agricola, but I don't think we need it. Viticulture, no. Like, I love Viticulture. Viticulture may still be my favorite Stonemaier game, and is one of my favorite worker placement games of all time. But we already have, like, I'm already kind of chafing at the presence of worker culture, and if you're going to only have one in there, it should be either Kalis or Agricola. King of Tokyo is one that I mentioned. Like, I really feel like there's not a ton of representation of lighter games on this list. The only argument that I could see for Mage Knight is to have some representation for solo games because it's such a popular solo game.
Yeah.
But I also don't like Mage Knight. I have owned and gotten rid of Mage Knight 3 times in my life. So I am firmly on the I don't like Mage Knight train, and I think there's better picks to have representing solo and the popularity of solo gaming beyond that.
I think in 2 years we're gonna have, I think, the best solo game become eligible and hopefully become a first ballot, because we have a couple options there actually of really good solo board games. So in 2017, so in 2 years, both Spirit Island and Gloomhaven will be eligible. And I
hate you for saying that Spirit Island and Gloomhaven are about to be 10 years old. I mean, I realize that's 2 years from now, but I still view those as like the new hotness, and now I'm old.
I have to imagine both of those will get in pretty quickly. One thing to note, at least in this list, is they said a game has to be 10 years or older. The only game from 2015 is Through the Ages, and then you have Concordia from 2013, Terra Mystica from 2012, Castles of Burgundy from 2011, and every game before is from 2010 or earlier. So I think that...
What about Mafia or Werewolf? We don't have a hidden traitor. You know, I mentioned that the influence of Lord of the Rings on Shadows over Camelot, which would be a fine inclusion if Mafia and Werewolf are a little too tangential. But then, like the massive popularity of the Resistance or Avalon would be great because they inspired countless games since. So there's definitely a lineage there that if they're not included this year, then they definitely should in the future. And we're still seeing games that are being developed that are riffs on that same central conceit. That goes all the way back to, like a bunch of college students playing Mafia, whatever,
I've played
30, 40 years ago or whatever.
I mean, I'll say even back in 2015, I was playing like nonstop Werewolf in college. Like that was like my friends and I would just be like, we're coming over and we're gonna play Werewolf just nonstop pretty much. It still has like a massive, like that genre has such a massive influence, I think, still just in terms of approachability and also being like a lighter weight game that non-gamers are down to play. Like that's, I'm kind of surprised with that there isn't a hidden traitor game just to kind of put into the legacy of board games, the influence that has had on our hobby.
The only other one, and I just recorded a podcast for Board Game Geek earlier this week about hidden movement, and so maybe this is just something that's personal to me, that hidden movement isn't as pervasive as I'd like it to be. So maybe I'm just biased, but Scotland Yard is from 1983, and I very much view that as a lot of people's introduction to modern hobby games. And if not Scotland Yard, then maybe Fury of Dracula or Letters from Whitechapel as an older, super influential hidden movement game.
Yeah, and I think that's... I can see Scotland Yard making it next year. I think, again, this first list, I feel like they just tried to get a ton of games that people wouldn't disagree with. And they wanted to also get games from all over the history of board gaming, and I think this is as solid of a basis as they could get. I just, we kind of hope that they rectify missing some of these bigger genres and also missing some games that, deserve to be remembered.
Right. Yeah, and so like these games that I'm talking about, I don't know if they're necessarily like super big omissions and it invalidates the integrity of the list, and it's more so like if they're trying to do it right, these are some of the games that I think that if they didn't recognize them this year, then they should be priorities for the future for sure.
Yeah. I think that's as good a time as any to kind of wrap up any thoughts we have. I think that, interesting job, or good job, interesting list. I'm here for it. I'm excited to see what makes it in next year, just so that we kind of have because I guess my thought is I kind of don't know what to expect the next class to be. Like, I don't know what the next class of 2026 Board Game Geek Hall of Fame is going to look like. But it's the first year, so we'll find out, I guess.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it.
We have a few listener questions that were sent in to us for all of our listeners out there. You can also be in this section of the podcast. Please feel free to comment on this video on YouTube or on Spotify, or email us in at cardboardherald@gmail.com. We have a couple. We also post. We also post a community post before we record each week, so you can also comment on that. The first one is from Blue Sec Pearl, aka Tim. Hello, Tim.
Hey, Tim.
What are your thoughts on blinging your games? For example, inserts, metal coins, upgraded resources, versus buying new games. As someone who lives in a tiny apartment in a city, I hear you, Tim. I am there with you.
Yeah.
I tend to bling out my games to entice my friends to revisit games over and over. I also really like assembling wooden inserts, as it makes setup and tear down a breeze. That said, the wooden insert for Twilight Imperium was a doozy with more than 40 trays.
Yes.
Yes. I think that this hobby has an issue with the cult of new, where it's you have to buy new games like as soon as they come out. A lot of board game reviews push like buying a new game pretty much as soon as possible. In some ways, or at least just brings your attention to the fact that, there are constantly new games that you need to play to have context for what we're talking about. Yeah. And I think that if you have a game that you love and you know you're going to play again and again, having upgraded pieces or having inserts that makes getting the game onto and off the table a lot easier. Like, I know the Gloomhaven insert is from all I've heard from you and then seen online is like a lifesaver to actually get Gloomhaven onto and off the table in a reasonable amount of time. Right. And we talked about board game components last week, and I think that this is a little bit of an extension of that, which is if you're going to be playing a game over and over and you want it to feel like a premium experience each time, I have no issues with blinging games versus buying a new game. Yeah. Especially with having limited space. As a person who just moved and also has a apartment where I am always on the verge of running out of board game space. I currently have some space at the moment that will be filled soon. But, I think blinging your games is a super viable option.
Yeah, well, between the two of us, I'm definitely the person who's investing more in upgrades to my games. Yeah. And I think, it's one of those things. It's money is going to be a relative thing for anyone, but naturally, I am someone who invests in my games and the games I love. Part of that expression is to upgrade them. I've made clay components for my stuff. I like painting minis or, dry brushing minis. I like making little reference cards for my games. I like making custom inserts. When foam core was the hotness, I got some foam core and made some foam core inserts. I've, like 3D printed. I've done all kinds of things because that's part of the expression of love and joy and an outlet for creativity and craftiness, which I think works beautifully, those things in concert. And I agree that we should be really celebrating the games that we love instead of always going to new games. One, because of the space being an issue, and two, you hit a critical mass of games where you start feeling like there's an obligation to get them all played at a certain regularity, and then you're suddenly playing games out of obligation instead of out of joy. Like, oh, I haven't played this one, so we might as well play this one, even though I'd really like to play Hansa Teutonica or, like whatever. So if it's a difference between buying a game that's going to be a quick distraction and you're not even sure that you're really going to love it, or it's something that's going to actually elevate your joy in a game, go for it. Great components aren't going to fix a bad game. And also, I think there's a tipping point. Everyone's going to have to evaluate it themselves. There's a fine line between elegant and obscene. And when, like, the weight of the game, the joy that you can actually get from the gameplay is far exceeded by the quality of components, it kind of becomes a little bit weird. But yeah, I'm all for it. I don't sleeve, though. Sleeving, that's not me.
The next question we have is from Sean's 3911. I may have asked this before, but do you consciously or subconsciously enjoy a game more when you win? He goes on to say, sometimes if I pull off something great and win, I will have the reaction of, this game is awesome, when I may not have if I had lost. Also, do you enjoy a game more when you teach it versus learning it? I think I enjoy games less learning them, but that might just be he's not as interested in those games.
Yeah. Well, I think there's probably some bias in that if you are the gamer of your group and you tend to learn all the games, and this is a game that you haven't gone out of your way to learn and someone else is teaching you, then yeah, maybe that's just speaking to that you didn't go out of your way to learn it, so you weren't that interested in it. That's just a correlation there. But personally, I think with how many games I have to learn at this point, even though I tend to own the most games in my game group, I always relish when someone else is teaching me a game. I enjoy the experience, and I also like giving someone else the opportunity to not have to feel like I'm just barking at them all the time. But winning or losing, honestly, this used to be a much bigger problem for me. Like when I was in my early 20s, I think that just the importance of winning was much more was much more meaningful to me. And because of that, if I lost a game, I would look for ways to deflect my own insecurity. And so part of that could have been blaming the game as opposed to blaming, my own skill or chance or whatever. And as I've become more of a, healthy adult, that is less of a problem. And so I can play a game, lose terribly, and go, oh my God, this is awesome. That said, I tend to do better at games that I really like because I invest myself. It clicks with me in ways. So I think I trend towards doing better at the games that I like as opposed to liking more the games that I do good at.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that I mean, I'll say when it's like my wife and I playing a game together, she wins a ton more, and I still love playing those games. Like she anytime we play Splendor, she destroys me. Anytime we play like Ascension, she destroys me. She's played it so much more than me that she just has.
Mim the Ruthless.
She is really good at a lot of these games that we play frequently, and I'm still having a ton of fun with them. But that's also because I've already I know these games. I know that I enjoy them even if I'm losing. I think,
but you're at a convention. It's the first time you played a game, and you just lost horribly.
I think I can see it being if I lost poorly, but I can by the end of the game be like, oh, I lost poorly because I did XYZ wrong. And now that I've played the game, I know a better way of approaching how the game mechanics work. I am still going to enjoy that game. But if I feel like I lost the game and I'm just like, I'm still lost in space. Like, I have no clue what I did wrong. It felt like I didn't. Like, I'm sure there is a way for me to play that game better, but I just don't know how.
Right.
But I think that I would have that opinion if I won, too. So it's like a thing of, if I just was like, oh, I won. I have no clue what I did.
Right.
We just happened
there's no accounting for well, I guess there is accounting. There's a whole field of accounting for the subconscious and its impact on our perspective. There are many people who study that and make that their life's pursuit to understand more about that. But as far as, like, if we want just a little bit of evidence here, this is just one data point, but for one of my favorite games of the year is Kelp. I have played Kelp many times. By the time I had reviewed Kelp, I had played it at least 5 times, and I had not won it a single time. I have won it once now, but Kelp, I gave an exceedingly pleased review over Kelp, and it was on the top 10 games of the year for us. And yeah, it was a game that I'm not good at Kelp. I just am not good at it. Shark, Octopus, I freaking love that game, but I need to get better.
Fair enough. So yeah, I mean, I think that we're both in the pool of, for us it kind of doesn't matter, but also I feel like we play enough new games that we've both formed a strong enough, like, I don't know about you, but I definitely look at games now with a much different light of broader picture. How did this game work?
We have a more academic approach to board games than just purely this is a facilitation of winning or losing.
Well, I definitely now, becoming more involved with Cardboard Herald, look at games and try to think, how would I explain my opinions on this game to an audience, even if I don't ever plan on doing that. I'm not gonna make a review on Camel Up. I haven't played. I played it twice. I had a ton of fun. That game is old enough that I'm not gonna do a review on it. But even then, I found myself going,
Right.
how would I talk about this?
Yeah, well, you never know when you're going to have to talk about, like, your top 10 Camel games or whatever, and that might be it.
So that's that. And then finally, we have our last viewer question coming into us from Andrew. Dear Harold, thank you for referencing the Dear Harold name that we've
from our
decided
etiquette.
from our etiquette. Dear Harold, would you be open to playing games with a chess clock or turn timer? I have brought up this idea many times with my game group, but I'm the only one who seems to think it's a good/fun idea. Mini poker tournaments have a turn timer nowadays, and people have a set number of tokens they can use to extend their time. Is this too antagonistic for a casual game night? A couple other notes. Eric? I think it's probably too antagonistic for a casual game night. I can see it. I can see it having a really good presence, and I actually think that it would be really fun to have a game that isn't like built around real-time strategy, that like has it where it's like you have 2 minutes to do your turn from start to finish. I think have that kind of baked into it to help overcome analysis paralysis.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to do it as like a super passive aggressive, non-confrontational way of calling out someone. Like if everyone at the table, including the person who has the AP, realizes that you're doing this just to circumvent their problem, then maybe like actually acknowledging the problem and talking to them is the better way to go. But if it is something meant to enhance fun, to add an element of strategy or pressure to a game, then I'm all about it. I have played with a timer on Forbidden Island, for example. I've done timed games of Forbidden Island. I've done other challenges like no talking, completely nonverbal cooperative play on Forbidden Island or Forbidden Desert. Timed challenges. Famously, or at least internet famously, about 10 years ago, there was like a whole, it was either Reddit or Board Game Geek thread on playing Yahtzee with a timer, or not Yahtzee, Jenga, playing Jenga with a timer, where each player only has 2 minutes. And so that, naturally forces people to not be careful and spend their time wisely. I think that's really smart. And in any sort of tournament play, I could really see a timer being super integral to it. For a casual night, if it's with randos, I wouldn't bring it. If it's with like random people or new guests or, people that you haven't played with regularly, that's going to add a level of pressure and intimidation that I think would just be uncomfortable. But if it's with your friends who you regularly game with, it's a game that everyone understands and is comfortable with, then I think a timer is at least worth the discussion of like, hey, what if we play like Ticket to Ride, but we only have 6 minutes each? And so like when your turn comes up, you gotta really run with it. Or 10 minutes or whatever it is. But I think that could be a cool thing.
I think it could be fun. Well, I also think that it could bring a whole new layer to some of these games where it is prone to analysis paralysis, where it is encouraging you as a player to, you're trying to do things not in the most optimal way. You are trying to do things in the most real world time efficient way. Like, I think Ticket to Ride with 5 minutes, like you get 5 minutes the entire time. Maybe you add the chess timer rule where when you hit the button you gain like 10 seconds or something like that,
right?
Where I mean you can get some time back, but like I think that can be super. I can see that being a fun new way of experiencing a game that people are comfortable with. I think for me it seems like this has more to do with players at the table having analysis paralysis, and that's a different discussion than do you need a timer on casual game nights,
right? And I think that can be part of the discussion, but like I said, don't make that like a passive aggressive thing. If I had a player who like they are taking 5 times as long as anyone else. Like, it is beyond reason. And, like you're starting to feel like you're not having fun gaming, or other people have come to you and they're like, hey, I love coming to your house, but I don't know, just Eric takes these turns, and it just kind of like, we don't have time to do that. We have to get a babysitter or whatever. Then I would talk to Eric or whoever in this scenario, and I'd be like, hey, so here's the deal. I invite you to the house because I like gaming with you. I want to keep on gaming with you. But I have to address this, man. You take a long time on your turns. And I get it, that you're trying to get the most out of the game, but it's not really compatible with everyone else at the table and in this setting. So here's one thing that we could do. I'm just throwing it out there. If this is an idea that you might be into, is what if we have just kind of like a timer that everyone has and everyone is subject to, and there's just kind of like an understanding that you're, investing a certain amount of time, and you are disqualified if you use up the entirety of your time in the game, or it could be a certain amount of time to take your turn. And just throw it out as an idea. Sometimes those are uncomfortable conversations. I'm not saying that that's always going to be successful, but in my experience, people know when they're making other people uncomfortable, and sometimes they don't really have it in them to bring it up themselves, especially if they're feeling embarrassed about their own, AP or whatever. And so someone else bringing it up, acknowledging it, that kind of lets the air deflate a little, the tension deflate, and then, look for reasonable accommodations. I'm a state employee, so if someone has an issue, I don't look to get rid of them. I look for, how do we find a reasonable accommodation for this thing that you have? And I think a timer could absolutely be that.
Okay, and then I think the more fun question baked into this, and he does ask this later on, what would be the penalty for running out of time in a 3+ player game? Loss of turn, deduct points, loss of resources, public shaming. I think you bring him out to town hall and throw some rotten tomatoes at him.
Yeah, I think a good old tomatoing, or even stoning, if you're wanting to get particularly medieval. But I guess we don't want the liability there. My lawyers, aka Eric, because he wears all the hats at Cardboard Herald right now. A lot
of random hats.
Yeah,
even though I'm the one without a hat at the moment.
Exactly. He wears a lot of invisible hats. Is telling me we don't need that liability on our hands. I don't know. I think it really depends on the game. Most of the time, I would say that loss of turn, where you just have to make an instant decision. At that point. If you don't, then I would say shaming. Come on. We all agreed to this. Just make a decision.
I think shaming, I see 3 different punishments as being viable. Shaming, either loss of turn or you punt your turn, like how the NFL draft does it, where there was like a year the Minnesota Vikings just didn't submit their pick, and then every team after them could just run up and submit their pick, and they would get to go before them. So it's like 2 teams got their pick in before the Minnesota Vikings eventually got theirs in.
Right.
And they were trying. I think it came out that they were trying to trade back 2 spots anyway, so it was fine. It was fine. But if you don't take your turn in the amount of time, it passes to the next person's turn until you are ready to take. You have to be like, okay, here's XYZ what I'm going to do. I can see that being an option. Or we could just say hey, if it's you get 5 minutes for the entire game, use it as you want on your turns, if a game allows that, or 10 minutes or whatever the time limit is. Being well, if you run out of time, you are not eligible to win.
Yep.
Just being if they're taking all of that time because they are trying their best to win, that seems as fitting a punishment as any. You just be like, hey, well, these are the rules we're playing with. You are playing outside of the rules, and therefore you're not eligible to win the game.
And I think, again, context is everything. If you're playing a hardcore tournament, even if it's a tournament among friends, then having to cede possible victory is a totally viable outcome. If you're looking for this is a method to try to overcome general AP, then maybe if there's a 2-minute timer on a turn, someone doesn't have like a complete game-ending punishment.
Yeah,
but maybe you encourage them, all right, time's up. You got to make a decision, and give them a little bit of forgiveness and kind of increase that pressure if it happens again and again. Because you got to remember, like, the person who has AP, that's their natural instinct. They are changing their deep-seated behaviors and accommodating everyone else at the table by rushing. If they normally take 5 minutes and you're asking them to do what used to take 5 minutes in 2 or 1, then you're asking a lot. I'm not saying that you're wrong to ask it, but, give a degree of forgiveness as you kind of get them into a habit of moving a little faster.
Yeah. Or the other option is respectful execution.
Yes.
Respectfully.
Very respectful.
Respectfully.
Very elegant,
execution.
Very honorable, very posh.
And, I think if anybody who listens to the Cardboard Herald podcast takes anything away from this entire hour and a half that we've been talking is we are pro respectful execution.
I think our lawyers might need to talk to us again. They might need to hit the books. Well, the light went off, my timed light on my plant right next to this, so I think that is telling us to have a good night. And so I don't think we need to have beans in the future. We're just full of sass and discussion.
I think we beamed too hard. We beamed too close to the sun. And we're going to have to take that into account for future podcasts. But as always, thank you, Jack, for chatting with me this evening.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you to our viewers for tuning in and listening in on whatever your preferred platform is. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them into cardboardherald@gmail.com or any of the other ways that we've listed. And you might be featured in our next Dear Herald segment. Thank you for all our patrons for supporting us, and have a good rest of your day.
Later.